Well, good morning. As Paige said, my name's Adam Spikes, for those of you who don't know me. Bob is in Trago, Wisconsin, and he's at a conference this morning teaching. Now, also next week, Russ Perry is going to bring you the message, and he's going to be talking on how to please God, so you don't want to miss that. This morning, we're going to be talking about coincidences, chance, luck, and is that even a real thing? I think most of us here probably know that that's not true, but we're going to look at it from the biblical perspective, and I'm going to be talking about things in the book of in the book of Esther. So, obviously that was just so happened, right? So the book of Esther was written by an unknown author. The date of this was between 483 and 473 BC, and as Paige mentioned, this is going to be a two-part series. Today's message is going to be on God's providence. The other message will be on God's protection. Now, two really interesting facts about Esther is that the book of Esther is the only book in the Bible that does not mention God. That may have been something that you didn't know. Also, of all the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were like 900 manuscripts found all over these caves over in the Dead Sea area. None of them contained anything about Esther. So two really interesting facts about a book that doesn't mention God and was not found among all the Dead Sea Scrolls, even though there were books that were covered multiple times. Now, I want to give you a timeline of where Esther is in reference to the other books in the Bible and in the Old Testament. So I created this timeline. It's the major events from Moses to Esther, and I've got cards out in the foyer if you want this timeline. But basically, I'm just going to kind of go through this timeline to help you understand where the Israelites are at this time. So as we've been learning from Bob, we're in we're in Exodus. We're learning about Moses and how he's leading the Hebrews out of captivity in Egypt. And as they're heading out, the nation is basically on the cusp of going into the promised land. Moses doesn't get to go, so he passes the baton to Joshua. Joshua leads them in, and then he basically is leaving it in the hands of the people, and the people just lose it. They start going downhill. Then begins the period of the judges. And the judges go for about 300 years. Of course, most of us know of Samson. Ruth was in the middle of that. And so at the end of this 300-year period, they're whining, they want a king. They want a king like all the other nations around them. And so what does God do? He says, all right, you want a king? I'll give you a king. And so God sends Samuel to Saul to anoint him, and Saul becomes the first king of Israel. Now, Saul did a lot of good things at the beginning, but then he started to kind of fall off because he was disobeying. And that disobedience is going to play a major role this morning. After Saul came David, the greatest king in Israel. His son Solomon then ruled, and he had so many things going for him. The wisest man who ever lived, the richest man who ever lived, but as his life went on, he walked away from God, and as a result, Israel split into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom, which was 10 of the tribes, went to the north, and they were Israel. 2 went to the south, they were called Judah, and those were the 2 tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Now, during this time, there were a lot of kings, and those kings in Israel and in Judah were really bad. There were only a few good kings, and in the grand scheme of things, most of the kings that were in that period did things that were abominable to God. They were actually getting to the point at the end of the period where they were worshiping and making sacrifices to other idols, other gods, other idols, and God was just fed up with it. In Deuteronomy, he says that if you do the things that I've commanded, I will bless you. But if you don't, here are all the curses that you're going to have on you. And we're getting to that period at the end of this time where the kings have just done so many bad things that God says, okay, I'm going to give you over to your sin. And basically, he brings in the Assyrians. The Assyrians take the northern kingdom, and then about 100 years later, the Babylonians come in, they conquer over the Assyrians and take Judah into captivity. Now, in Jeremiah, we read that for 70 years, they're going to be in exile. Now, during that 70 years, we know about Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and of course, most of us know the stories of Daniel. Now, Daniel's accounts also talk about Nebuchadnezzar and all the things that they did. Now, Daniel was from the beginning all the way to the end, and at the end, we know that he's in the lion's den, and who put him there? King Darius. And so King Darius was not a Babylonian king, but a Persian king. And so after Darius comes Cyrus. Now we all know that Cyrus was the one, from reading in Ezra, he had this grand idea that he should send the Jews back to their homeland, and when they get there, he should help them build the temple, and then he should help build the wall, and he should just give them the money to do it. It's kind of coincidental that he would have these thoughts. I mean, these are people that are paying taxes, and they're people that could still be under him, yet he felt like he should send them back home. But as we read in Ezra 1, God put those thoughts in his mind. So you've got all of these people that are now able to go back home to Jerusalem, but only 50,000 actually go. So why didn't the other people go back home, even though that was the promised land? That was where they should be, and that was the command. Well, think about it. If your family has lived here in Marshall for 70 years, all of a sudden, are you just going to pick up and go back to what your homeland is? Probably not. I mean, you're rooted here. You have your jobs here, your family, your community. Perhaps you've got people you lean on. I mean, there's just all kinds of things that you could list, reasons to stay here. So when we get to Esther, their families are part of the people who chose not to go back. So technically, you could kind of look at them as kind of disobedient Jews because they're still in the land that is not the promised land. So here's where we start in Esther. In those days, King Ahasuerus, which many of us also know as Xerxes, reigned from his royal throne in the fortress of Susa. Now, another reason why somebody would not want to go back to their homeland is because from Susa, which is in modern day Iran, it's at the southern part of Iran, it's about 1,500 kilometers, because I know all of you know how many miles that is. 1,500 kilometers to Jerusalem. It's 900 miles, thereabouts. A 900-mile trek, basically through the desert, just to get back to your homeland to find out somebody's owning our property that we don't even know, and they'd have to fight for it. I mean, it'd be all kind of trouble. But just to kind of give you an idea, modern-day Tehran is up here at the north. Susa's down at the south. So some passages say that this was the winter fortress or the winter citadel. So this could have been one of many fortresses during that time. But this is Susa, which is also translated in some as Shushan. Okay, so before we get to this, I want to kind of set the stage of where we are in Esther. So the king's throwing this lavish feast, a feast so lavish that it's 180 days long. I mean, I just can't even begin to fathom what was going on for 180 days. I mean, I'm at somebody's party for a couple of hours, I'm ready to go home. And so this is 180 days, and then when that period is done, they throw a 1-week banquet. And so during this banquet, during the feast, it's basically displaying all the majesty and wonder of all of the things that are great about the Persian Empire. The king is showing all of his possessions. They're talking about the marble floors and these special couches and all the blue and red and purple linens that are hanging and the golden chalices, and they're all different and all this. And yet he's got the one thing that he wants to show to all the people, and he sends for her, his queen. But the queen says, no, I'm not coming. He's been summoned by the king, but she doesn't go. And it makes you think, I wonder why she would have chose not to go. It just so happens that she didn't, and it opens the door for a new queen, because what happens after this is the advisors get in an uproar and they say, King, we can't have this, all these women not obeying their husbands and so forth and so on. And they sent out a decree and said that Vashti should be replaced by someone who is more worthy. So now we've got a door open for a new queen. And we're going to learn about the Jews that are now in this particular area. In Esther 2, verses 5 and 7, in the fortress of Susa, there was a Jewish man named Mordecai. And Mordecai was the legal guardian of his cousin Hadassah, which is her Jewish name, and her Persian name is Esther, because she had no father or mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was extremely good looking. That was in there. I didn't change the text. When her father and mother died, Mordecai had adopted her as his own daughter. So here we see, as part of this, the father and mother die. got obviously an elder cousin that's going to raise this girl. She's beautiful, and it's just kind of interesting that all of a sudden we're about to have this beauty contest because they're trying to find, of all the women in the land, it wasn't just Jewish women, it was all the women, the young women in the land. And so they're called into the palace, and so when they come into the palace, all of these women are to be placed in certain places, and they've got to take these beauty treatments. And Esther finds favor with Hegai, who is the chief eunuch to the king over the ladies. So because of the favor that Esther found, he places her in the best room in the palace. Also, he gives her all of these extra beauty treatments and advances her in the line. So it's interesting that all of a sudden, this one girl who was motherless and fatherless now has the opportunity to potentially become queen. Now, when it comes time for the king to look to see each of the women, they get one night with the king, and then when they're in their little room, right before they go in to see the king, they're able to take something. But Esther takes nothing and only takes the advice of Hegai and goes into the king, and what happens? The king loved Esther more than all of the other women. She won more favor and approval from him than did any of the other virgins. He placed the royal crown in her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. So what's very interesting, and I think that you're going to really appreciate this, there was somebody there that day and they caught a picture of her, and here she is. It wasn't exactly like I had pictured, but yes, that's Esther. All right, so now she's in place. She's in the king's palace, and she's got some authority. And all of a sudden, the plot starts to thicken. So in Esther 2 at the end, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the entrance became infuriated and planned to assassinate King Ahasuerus. When Mordecai learned of the plot, he reported it to Queen Esther, and she told the king on Mordecai's behalf. When the report was investigated and verified, both men were hanged on the gallows. This event was recorded in the historical record in the king's presence. And that's going to play a major role at the end of this story this morning. And after all of this stuff took place, King Ahasuerus honored Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite. Now, earlier I was talking about Saul and how he had some disobedience. So here's what happened, and here's how this plays into what I'm going to tell you this morning. The reason that there was some disobedience is Samuel goes and tells Saul, you need to wipe out all of the Amalekites, wipe all of them out and kill all of the men, the women, the babies, the nursing babies, everything. It was amazing that this went out. Also, all of the cattle and the livestock and the sheep, all of these things were what God had commanded. Saul goes out and he basically kills everything that he felt was not that valuable. He kept the king, he kept some of the choice cattle, and then here comes Samuel to join the entourage of people after they had defeated the Amalekites. And Saul runs up to him and he says, I've done everything that the Lord commanded. And Samuel said, but what is this bleating and lowing that I hear in the background? And sure enough, Samuel tells Saul, you have disobeyed God, and the kingdom has been stripped from you and given to another. So it's because of this that we see that the king was King Agag of the Amalekites. And as the story goes, Agag then had a wife who got away, and that she had a baby, and then there was the people, the Agagites. So that's how there's a connection with Haman, and you're gonna see in just a minute a connection between what I just shared with you about Saul and Haman. He promoted Haman in rank and gave him a higher position than all the other officials. The entire royal staff at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman because the king had commanded this to be done for him. But Mordecai would not bow down or pay homage. When Haman saw that Mordecai was not bowing down or paying him homage, he was filled with rage. And when he learned of Mordecai's ethnic identity, it seemed repugnant to Haman to do away with Mordecai alone. So killing Mordecai was not going to be good enough. He wanted more. And what did he do? He planned to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout Ahasuerus' kingdom. Now, I want to point out that I had to practice saying this name like 1,000 times whenever I was preparing for the sermon. So what does he do? He plans this major revenge. He's wanting to get Mordecai back, but also all of the Jews. And so he decides that he's just going to throw some dice down and see where the dice land to be able to know when this revenge should take place. So in the first month, the pur, that is the lot, the cast before Haman, was cast before Haman, and it fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. So it lands literally at the farthest one away. So just so happens that it happens to be the farthest one away. So I've got this highlighted pur. You're probably thinking I'm saying it wrong. It probably is, but it's Purim, which in the way that we would say it is Purim, which is the festival that the Jews celebrate, which is based on what happens here in Esther. So that is the lot that was cast. Now, even though this landed on the 12th month, it was no coincidence. Why? Because we read in Proverbs that the lot is cast into the lap, but it's every decision is from the Lord. So moving back to this, now, letters were sent by the couriers to each one of the royal provinces telling the officials to destroy, kill, annihilate all the Jewish people, young and old, women and children, and plunder their possessions on a single day, the 13th day of Adar, the 12th month. Now, one thing that I want to mention about this, he had to get this pushed through before he could actually do it. And the Bible says, in the Christian Standard Bible, it translates all of the measurements into measurements that we would know and understand. And it says that it was 375 tons is what Haman offered the king. 375 tons of silver. Now, I figured it out. It's 11 million troy ounces of silver at $32 where it was yesterday. That's $350 million. He was willing to pay $350 million to annihilate the Jews. That's a lot of money. Now, why would he have done that? Well, number one, if they're going to plunder their possessions, chances are they're probably going to recoup some of that money. And when you figure out the number of Jews that was in the land, Haman was basically paying about a half a shekel per person to get rid of them. So the letters go out, the whole city is in confusion. The people, the Jews that are in all the land are just really concerned about what's about to happen. They know that their time is near, or going to be coming near at the end of the year. And so Mordecai is distraught. He goes, he's wailing, and he's covered himself in sackcloth and in ashes, and he's just crying and crying and crying. In fact, apparently it made a scene because it was reported to Esther. And so Esther's trying to find out what's going on, and he says, hey, this thing went out, and they're going to basically annihilate all our people. And so Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to tell Mordecai, all the royal officials and people of the royal provinces know that one law applies to every man or woman who approaches the king in the inner courtyard and has not been summoned the death penalty unless the king extends the gold scepter, allowing that person to live. Esther gave an excuse, or maybe she was thinking that she was immune to this law because she was queen. And so that was the message that she sent back to Mordecai, because Mordecai probably thought, well, she's in a position that she can influence what the king is going to be doing. But instead, she says, I can't do it, because if I do, then I'll be subject to the death penalty. Everybody knows that. And one of the most popular verses from Esther comes here when Mordecai replies, don't think that you will escape the fate of the Jews because you are in the king's palace. If you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will come to the Jewish people from another place. But you and your father's family will be destroyed. Who knows, perhaps you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Can you see the coincidence here? Not really a coincidence though, right? God's hand is moving in this the entire time. He has put Esther in a position where she can step in. And when we stop and think about the fact that throughout our lives, God gives us all of these opportunities, just like he had given Esther. He gives us opportunities to do the right thing, to be brave, to be courageous, and do those things that further his kingdom. So she responds, and I feel like she responds well. Go and assemble all the Jews who can be found in Susa and fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my female servants will also fast in the same way. After that, I will go to the king, even if it is against the law. If I perish, I perish. So she's accepted her lot, if you will, and she's going to go and she's going to try and get this taken care of for the Jews and the Jewish people. But what I really like is that not only did she ask Mordecai and the Jews to fast, and I would assume pray in the middle of that, but she also said that she was going to be doing that. And one of the things that came to me as I was preparing this is, how many times have we been in a sticky situation or something, a very uncomfortable situation, and we ask somebody to pray for us, but we haven't even prayed for ourselves? As many times I have done that. I know that I'm guilty of that. So she asks, and she also does it as well. Okay, so on the third day, she's dressed in her royal clothing and stood in the inner courtyard of the palace facing it. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the royal courtroom facing the entrance. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the courtyard, she gained favor with him. That is code for the king extended the gold scepter in his hand toward Esther, and she approached and touched the tip of the scepter. So not only did it work out, but it worked out well. Now, she approaches the king, and he says, "What is it, Queen Esther?" The queen asks her, "Whatever you want, even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." And she responds, "If it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come today to the banquet I have prepared for them." What an interesting thing that she would have included Haman in this, right? So all of a sudden, we've got this special banquet that they're about to attend. Now, when they go to the banquet, the king is drinking the wine and asks Esther, "Whatever you ask, it will be given to you. Whatever you want, even to half the kingdom, will be done." So basically, he's really wanting to know exactly what is this banquet all about. And her response is crazy. Now, let me read the scripture and then I'll make the comment. Esther answered, "This is my petition and my request. If I have found favor in the eyes of the king and it pleases the king to grant my petition and perform my request, may the king and Haman come to the banquet I will prepare for them. Tomorrow I will do what the king has asked." So they come to this banquet and they're there, and we're going to find out what I want tomorrow. And so, I mean, now granted, if you think about it, if you're having 180-day feasts, 2 days, probably not a big deal to them. Okay, so anyway, at this point, Haman probably left full of joy and good spirits because he was probably drinking some good spirits, but he's leaving just on his high horse. I mean, he's got to be feeling good. Not only is he doing so good, he's got the favor of the king. He's obviously now got the favor of the queen, and he's got all of these things that he's looking to get done, including the upcoming date of annihilating the Jews. Now that day when Haman left full of joy and in good spirits, when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate and Mordecai didn't rise or tremble in fear at his presence, Haman was filled with rage towards Mordecai. Yet Haman controlled himself and went home. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh to join him. So isn't it just like normal human nature? You start kind of feeling bad, you feel down, and you want to get your friends involved with it. Like, "Hey, can you come over, man? I got to tell you something. It's really bad. Just come on over." And so next thing you know, they're at the house, and he's sharing with them the story. And before he gets to this part, I want you to understand one little thing that I didn't put on any slides. He's going through this list of all the things that are going good in his life, all the things that that he has achieved the position that he's in, the position that his sons are in, all of these possessions that he has. Obviously, he has $350 million worth of silver, or did have. And he's got this great thing going with the king. He's got the queen's approval. And he says, yet none of that matters because of this one guy, Mordecai. And let me tell you, how many times have we in life overlooked all the good things and blessings in our lives just to concentrate on one little bad thing? I know I have. It's one of those things where it's like, I just can't, for whatever reason, get my mind off of this. And it leads to other bad things. And in the case of Haman, we're going to see exactly where it leads. So his wife Zeresh and all his friends tell him, have them build a gallows 75 feet tall. Ask the king in the morning to hang Mordecai on it. Then go to the banquet with the king and enjoy yourself. You know, when I read this the first time, I got to thinking, I wonder if this guy kept going on and on and on about Mordecai to the point where his wife and the friends were like, oh my God, would he just shut up? Like, just tell him something he wants to hear. My goodness. I mean, tell him to build a gallows. Yeah, that's a good idea. Sure enough, the advice pleased Haman, so he went and he had the gallows constructed. Apparently, there's overnight gallows builders in this particular city, and so that's exactly what happened. So now what he's going to do is he's going to get up in the morning and he's going to approach the king about this, but what he doesn't know is that night, sleep escaped the king, so he ordered that the book recording daily events be brought and read to the king. I have to share a funny story, and a lot of you know my father-in-law, Randy Jones, and his wife, Sandy. He shared a story on a text thread recently, and he said, when Sandy can't sleep, she asks me to talk about work stuff. And so when I think about this, I think about that story. So he was trying to find something really boring to help soothe him to sleep. They found the written report on how Mordecai had informed on Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the entrance when they had planned to assassinate the king. The king inquired, what honor and special recognition have been given to Mordecai for this act? The king's personal attendants replied, nothing has been done for him. But it was literally written in the king's presence. So for whatever reason, he didn't do anything for Mordecai whenever it originally was written down. What a coincidence. Now it goes on and it talks about how at about that time, it must have been about morning time, because the way that the scripture reads, the king asks, who's in the courtyard? So there must have been some shuffling around or something, and the king asks who's down there. The attendants go look and they see, oh, it's Haman. And he says, oh, good. Tell him to come up here immediately. So Haman comes in before the king, and the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king wants to honor? Haman thought to himself, who is it the king would want to honor more than me? And so you think about it. If you're in a position where you think it's you, you're about to spit out all this good stuff. And sure enough, that's exactly what he did. Haman told the king, for the man the king wants to honor, have them bring a royal garment that the king himself has worn, and a horse the king himself has ridden, which has a royal crown on its head. Put the garment and the horse under the charge of one of the king's most noble officials. Have them clothe the man the king wants to honor, parade him on the horse through the city square, and call out before him, this is what is done for the man that the king wants to honor. And what happens? The king told Haman, hurry and do just as you proposed. Take a garment and horse for Mordecai the Jew. You know Haman was just seething at this point. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I've got to do this. Who is sitting at the king's gate. And here's the other part. Do not leave anything out, or leave anything you have suggested. So not only did Haman have to swallow his pride, now he's got to parade Mordecai around the entire city, promoting him as this high person. So coincidental that he happened to be there just at the right time when the king was needing to know what was going to need to be done, and that he was a noble person and that he could carry this out. So this morning, we've basically gone through the first 6 chapters of Esther, and I hope that you see that there's been a lot of coincidences. And if you hadn't, I've put them on the screen so you can review them with me. There's 19 of them, so bear with me as I say, just so happens a few times. And keep in mind God's hand in all of these things as I read through them. So Esther just so happens to be Jewish, and she just so happens to be beautiful. She also just so happens to be favored by the king. Mordecai just so happens to overhear the plot against the king's life, and a report of this just so happens to be written in the King's Chronicles. Haman just so happens to notice that Mordecai does not kneel before him, and he just so happens to find out that Mordecai is a Jew. When Haman plots his revenge, the dice just so happen to indicate that the date for exacting revenge is put off for almost a year. Esther just so happens to get the king's approval to speak, but then she just so happens to put off her request for another day. Her deferral just so happens to send Haman out by Mordecai one more time, which just so happens to cause him to recount it to all his friends. They in turn just so happen to encourage him to build gallows immediately to hang Mordecai on it. So Haman just so happens to be excited to approach the king early the next morning. The king, it just so happens the previous night, the mighty king could not command a moment's sleep, and he just so happens to have had a book brought to him to recount Mordecai's deed. He then just so happens to ask whether Mordecai had been rewarded, to which his attendants just so happened to know the answer. And Haman just so happens to approach the king just when the king is wondering how Mordecai should be honored. So, what are the chances or what are the odds of all 19 of these things happening? So, being the nerd that I am, I decided I would go online and see if I could find a odds or a coincidence calculator. And so here is the odds that I was able to come up with for all 19 things happening. 1 in 10,888,523,241,464. And let me tell you something. That is 100% made up. I didn't even find anything online. So anyway, I just thought that would be a cool number to show y'all. But that doesn't matter because the main point here is what are the odds of all 19 occurring with God? And I think we all know the answer. Every single time. 1-to-1 every single time. So in conclusion, just recognize that there are no coincidences in life. The story of Esther reminds us that God is at work behind the scenes, aligning events, people, and timing according to his perfect plan and purpose. Ephesians 1 says, according to the plan of the one who works out everything in agreement with the purpose of his will. In Isaiah, we're going to go, the Lord of hosts has sworn, as I have planned, so shall it be, and as I have purposed, so shall it stand. Whoops, this thing's getting exciting. All right, application. Now, as you go through life, look at coincidences with new eyes. I think we all know that coincidences aren't truly coincidences and that there is no such thing as chance or luck. But look at it with new eyes. Recognize that God's working in everything. Think about what we just sang. It was kind of a coincidence that we sang Waymaker this morning, wasn't it? It wasn't a coincidence. We obviously planned that. But even when I can't see it, you're working. Even when I can't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. So no matter what's going on in your life, God is working in the background. Number 2, consider that opportunities, challenges, or even setbacks might be divine appointments. And when I was going over this with Amanda, she said, you really need to give me something there. I want to understand an example so that it really brings it home. And the first thing that came to mind that I think will resonate with most of us is think about the people who were running late to work on 9/11. They were supposed to be in one of those towers and they couldn't make it in time. And number 3, trust that God is always working working even when his hand is invisible, and that nothing in your life is random. My hope is that this morning you would be encouraged to read the rest of Esther. It's an exciting story. It has a great end. And there's also a movie called One Night with the King. That was where that picture was from of Esther. I encourage you to go watch it. It's not exactly biblically accurate. They took some artistic license there, of course, but it will help you to understand the events that went on. Also, take into consideration that there is no luck, there's no coincidences, and recognize God working in your life. So that's all I've got for you this morning. Russ Perry is going to be here next Sunday to talk about how to please God. I'll be up here after the sermon if you have any questions or have anything to say about the sermon. So let's pray. Father, thank you so much for giving us the book of Esther. Thank you for giving us the story of how all these things can go on in a world where we may not even see your hand working, yet you are orchestrating the whole thing. I pray that we will recognize the small, large, and even minuscule things in life that may seem like nothing, but we can recognize them as your hand in our life every single day. I pray as everyone leaves here today that they would be keeping their mind and hearts on you so that they can be looking for these coincidences through new eyes, seeing that you are in control. Thank you for all that you do. Amen.